Hello and welcome to the Daily Climate Show. Coming up today, an unprecedented disaster concerns that thousands of tonnes of methane is leaking into the atmosphere from the damaged Nord Stream gas pipelines. Labour's plans for a zero-carbon electricity system by 2030. We look at whether that's realistic. And Hurricane Ian is due to hit Florida as a Category 4 storm after wiping out power supplies in Cuba. Hello and welcome to the Daily Climate Show, where we track the changes to our world and interrogate some of the potential solutions to the climate crisis. But let's start today in the Baltic Sea, where 3 leaks in 2 gas pipelines are raising fears of a climate disaster as greenhouse gases escape into the atmosphere. Neither of the Nord Stream pipelines were operational at the time, but both contained natural gas, which is largely composed of methane and is the second biggest cause of climate change behind carbon dioxide. Now, the European Union suspects the damage to the pipelines was sabotage and has warned of retaliation for any attack on Europe's energy networks. Now, the Nord Stream pipelines carry natural gas from Russia all the way to Germany. Now, 2 leaks have been reported on the Nord Stream 1 pipeline and 1 on Nord Stream 2, all near the Danish island of Bornholm. Now, maritime authorities have established a safety zone of 5 nautical miles around the island. Now, this footage, take a look at this, filmed by the Swedish Coast Guard, shows gas bubbling furiously on the surface in the Baltic Sea. Now, Denmark's Prime Minister says there's no doubt the leaks are intentional and that several explosions on the pipeline were observed. Now, our Europe correspondent Adam Parsons joins us now. Adam, there are a number of uncertainties with this story, but one thing is clear, the potential implications to the climate could be disastrous.
Yeah, exactly. There's an awful lot of not knowns here. We don't know precisely who did this. Lots of people suspect it was Russia. We don't know why they did it. Don't know how they did it. It's going to be hard to investigate. What we do know is that a huge amount of methane is bubbling up through the Baltic Sea and coming out on the surface. So another fact we don't really know is how much gas is in this pipeline and how it reacts. Frankly, there's no precedent for this, for vast release of methane coming to the surface. So unknowns. What was the temperature of the gas in the pipe? Just how much is in there? What was the pressure? How is that changing, of course, as it bubbles away? And also, how much of that methane will be absorbed by microbes on the way up to the surface? But all of that can't disguise the fact that this is bad news. Methane is the second most prevalent of the greenhouse gases and has, over a 20-year time frame, has a much greater potency for warming the planet than does carbon dioxide, about 80 times higher. So rough calculations I've seen from scientists suggest that over the course of a year, this might be equivalent to something like the output of 1 million cars, or the output of a city the size of Helsinki in terms of its climate impact. So, I mean, it's not world-ending, it is not utterly catastrophic, but this is very bad news. And I think the other thing this will do is once again focus attention on the need to be energy sufficient in Europe and to move away from these sort of damaging fossil fuels and look further at renewable energy.
OK, Adam, thank you very much. Now, the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, has said he wants the UK to be a clean energy superpower. In his leader's speech to the Labour conference yesterday, he announced plans to create a national energy company called Great British Energy, and it would operate independently, but with a mandate to invest in clean energy and emerging green tech. So Labour says it will be a clean generation company which will harness the power of Britain's sun, wind and waves, and it would be given £8 billion of initial funding, meaning it could potentially invest in more experimental tech like tidal power and modular nuclear reactors. Well, Labour's overall ambition is for a zero-carbon electricity system by 2030.
None of this will be easy. It's not like flicking a switch. It will mean tough battles on issues like planning and regulation. But when the Tories naysay and carp, remember this. The road to net zero is no longer one of stern, austere self-denial. It's at the heart of modern 21st century aspiration. Technology's turned everything on its head. Green and growth don't just go together. They're inseparable.
But how realistic are Labour's plans? Well, I'm glad to say that Madeleine Ratcliffe is here now to discuss this. I mean, would the tech be in place in time?
Well, it certainly won't be easy. It's certainly very ambitious. But the first thing to say is this is actually an acceleration of the current target to get there by 2035. So we should already be on that path. But having said that, it will be very hard to go faster than we're already going, to double the amount of solar and onshore wind we're getting, quadruple the amount of offshore wind we're getting, especially given how volatile the current international energy market is. And there are several really serious hurdles there, because it's not as simple as spend money, get some wind turbines and the problem's sorted. There'll be reforms to the national grid and to the energy market, planning, to get these turbines, these nuclear reactors in place. That will need changes to the planning laws to get them there in fewer than 10 years. And of course, it will rely on technology that isn't proven to work, like carbon capture. Now, spending on that technology is crucial, and that is why the plan has been welcomed by business groups and by environmental groups, because this is the first time we've seen this kind of plan with the R&D that's desperately needed, the spending on that R&D. So it will get us there at some point. It will be a challenge to get there by 2030.
OK, Maddie, thank you very much for the update on that. Let's take a look at some other climate news for you today, because Jaguar Land Rover says it will train 29,000 employees to work on electric cars. That's in the next 3 years. Now, the company says it wants to make all Jaguar and Land Rover cars available in pure electric form by the end of the decade. And at the moment, around 80% of its retailers around the world offer electric vehicle servicing. It's now aiming for most servicing technicians to have that sort of training this year. Now, fossil fuel companies have been banned from recruiting students through a university careers service for the first time. Now, the new policy from Birkbeck University of London states its careers service will not hold relationships of any kind with oil, gas or mining companies. Now, the decision follows a campaign supported by the student-led group People and Planet to cut off recruitment pathways to fossil fuel companies. Yorkshire Water has warned its 5 million customers the hosepipe ban in the region could continue well into next year. The company imposed the ban in August after reservoir levels fell below 50% for the first time since 1995. Yorkshire Water says that while there has been a slight reduction in the demand, average levels at the region's reservoirs have dropped even more to 35%. Now, Hurricane Ian has strengthened into an extremely dangerous Category 4 storm as it heads towards the US state of Florida. Now, the National Hurricane Centre says a life-threatening storm surge is now expected along the west coast of Florida and the Florida Keys area, with the possibility of 160-mile-per-hour winds. Well, this comes after the hurricane tore through Cuba and knocked out the country's entire electricity grid. The storm left 11 million people across the island without power and devastated some of the country's most important tobacco farms. But let's take a look at some live pictures, shall we? In Florida right now, from the not-so-aptly named Sunshine Skyway near Tampa Bay, which has now been shut because of high winds. And in the last few minutes, the President, Joe Biden, has said the storm is incredibly dangerous and people should obey all the warnings. Just look at that. Well, our US correspondent Martha Kellner sent this update.
We're still a few hours away from Hurricane Ian making landfall, but when it does hit, it's expected to be one of the strongest storms ever to make landfall in the US. You can tell just how much the winds have already picked up. Lashing rain, there are areas that are already flooded. And it's important to note that while the wind speed is expected to be well in excess of 100 miles per hour, it's the sheer force of the water that people are fearing most. In some coastal areas, a worst-case scenario projects the storm surge, so that's the wall of water, to be between 12 and 18 feet. For some of the coastal areas in this part of Western Florida, that would be utterly devastating. And that's why authorities have made a mandatory evacuation order for 2.5 million residents in these areas projected to be worst affected. But Floridians have seen these storms before, and in a number of them, in a minority, there is some complacency. So some people have stayed at home doing what they can to protect their property. That's involved lining the areas, the entrances to their properties with sandbags, putting boards up on the windows. We've just been down to the marina area of Fort Myers, and there are some people who have chosen to remain on their boats too, incredible though that might seem in this wind. We saw one elderly gentleman staying in his car, keeping a watchful eye on his boat. People fear the potential life-changing impact of what now will certainly be a catastrophic event, a Category 4 storm, one of the most powerful ever to approach landfall in the US, expected to hit in the next few hours.
OK, and finally, could this be the future of aviation? Take a look. A US company has conducted its first electric plane test flights, flying a battery-powered plane for 8 minutes over Washington state. Now, the plane is powered by 21,500 battery cells and could carry about 9 passengers. As it stands, the company aims to deliver electric passenger and cargo planes by 2027.